Hello and welcome to this video where we will be painting in watercolour this lady. This is a bust from the National Museum of Wales in Cardiff of Eugenie Marie Wynne, and it's a plaster by Jules Dalou, done I think in the second half of the 19th century. It's actually not terracotta, but it's painted plaster. But the fact that it's monochrome, you can see, is useful for us because we're not worrying about the colour, the real colour of her hair, of her skin, of her eyes, etc. It is in fact all one monochromatic sculpture, which is easiest to see where the light falls, and that's the reason I suppose why people enjoyed painting busts in the past and maybe still do. So we're going to be painting this using principally two colours. This one, which is Payne's grey, basically some grey with a bit of blue in it for the background, and this one, which is burnt sienna for the figure. I will also dab into other colours, but it's just because I tend to dab, but basically it's just the reddish terracotta colour and the grey background. I will be using different brushes, but really this one is the thinnest one I'll use. Then this one for the sort of bigger areas, I suppose, so to stop me being too detailed. And this one, which is nice for big washes, maybe this in between one as well. Obviously the bigger the brush, the more even your wash is going to be. If you get a small brush, it tends to break up the visual texture a bit, but that's okay as well. I will be using a water container and also this palette, plastic palette. I've got all my colours squeezed into these wells, and nice deep areas where you can mix plenty of colour. There will be a little box on the top left hand side up here where you can see me mixing while we do this. The paper I'll be using is this block of watercolour paper. If you want to buy watercolour paper, it's quite useful to buy a block rather than a pad, because blocks are gummed round the four edges, which means that you don't really need to stretch the paper, although it will bulge a bit because it expands. So that's the material. Off we go. The whole drawing and painting of this bust took about an hour and 10 minutes, which I think is quite a long time for you to sit through and watch. So what I've done is I've speeded it up about 5 times, so you can see me rushing through this quite quickly. And it gives me enough time to narrate what I was doing. So the first thing I'm doing is just drawing an outline in pencil of the face, trying to block in or think about at least the main dark areas and then light areas. It's not an exact portrait, so it's never going to be, you know, very accurate, but just as accurate as I can make it. I think I'm concentrating more on the painting itself more than the accuracy. So you can see the first thing I'm doing is deadening or colouring in the background to give myself more of a contrast against which to work. If I hadn't done this, you know, I could be darkening areas of the face as I go along, thinking they look quite dark, whereas in fact it was just because there's no contrast to gauge it against. So in the background I've used Payne's grey, which is just a standard kind of bluey grey, and the figure mainly I'm going to be painting with burnt sienna, which is a kind of this reddy brown, which is very similar to the painted terracotta colour. So what I'm trying to do is trying to get my values right. What I mean by that is my tonal differences. I want to make sure that the dark areas of the bust, the areas in shadow, are darker than the light areas, which is obvious. But the way of doing this in watercolour is different than maybe you're used to in oils or acrylics, because you're adding value each time, you're adding dark, but you can't really go back with white paint. There are ways of doing this, but I don't think that in this video I'm not doing this anyway. So it's an additive process, so I want to make sure that every time I mix a new colour, it is giving me this impression of stepping up the dark shading. So you can see here I've added the first layer, which is, you can see, quite light, and then the next layer I put on is slightly darker, which means I can shade in the darker areas of the face. This, as we go along, we shall see that it changes. What looks now to be quite dark will lighten. One, because watercolour paint lightens when it dries, and secondly, because we've got no darker colours to compare it with. I think it's a really important concept, this, and one I grapple with all the time, is that colour is always relative. So what seems dark is only dark because things around it are lighter. And it's a very important concept because, as you can see, every time we add another layer of colour, the area that looked dark now seems less dark. So what we can see emerging now is quite a nice 3-value study. We've got the lighter part on the forehead and the nose and the cheekbones, and the rest of the face is a kind of a medium value, and then by the ears a darker one. But as you see, I'm changing it all the time. But what you want to retain is that kind of clarity of not trying to give a really sort of full range spectrum of dark to light, but rather make it a bit chunky, so we're dividing it into clear values. And I don't often achieve this, but it is something that enables a figure to get that 3D kind of look. What's also good about this choice of model is that it's painted terracotta. Well, it's not terracotta. I think it's plaster painted with terracotta colour. But because it's all one colour, it's easier to look at the values of light and dark, because you're not distracted about, oh, what colour her hair is, her lips, her eyes, that kind of thing. You're just looking at the values of the light and the dark. So it's really good practice for that. So that's why, one of the reasons why I think academies and people have liked painting statues and busts and things like that, because it prevents you being distracted by other colours, local colours. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of upping the contrast again, to make my figure, to make the light stand out more. So if you darken the background, obviously the area that you haven't darkened stands out more. So it's, with watercolour, I always think it's very much this dance between dark and light. If something's too dark, then you can lighten it by painting the area around it. Yeah, it's quite a good technique to get used to doing. And so I'm just continuing with this darkening process. As you can see, every time I apply dark, the lights actually get lighter. And I'm trying to give the impression of volume, and I'm trying to stick as closely as I can to the model, but again, I'm not going to be too fastidious about it. As you can see from the little picture of the palette, basically I'm using burnt sienna, but I am kind of adding a bit of blue, which will make it turn into less of a grey, and it can darken it a bit because this blue is a darker colour, and possibly a bit of red to make it less cool. But you know, basically I could have done the same just by using the burnt sienna. You can see where I'm painting how the watercolour kind of flows. This is called the wet and wet technique, and it's a technique insofar as it's what happens when you put a wet liquid into another wet liquid. You know, the wetter liquid will flow into the dry liquid. And it's, I suppose, one of the main techniques of watercolour, because it's, you know, it happens all the time. If you're using watercolour, unless you're letting the layers of watercolour dry and then painting on top, you'll always get this flow of pigments flowing into each other, which is why people enjoy it so much. Which is, you know, I love it because you can never really control it fully. You can control as much as you can, but it also makes it exciting. You know, like, what's going to happen? What will it turn out like? How will it dry? What will the effects of these pigments flowing into each other? And it makes choosing colours interesting as well, because some pigments granulate, so you see little dots, and so I think it's interesting sort of learning a technique where you have to get into a bit about, you know, pigments, about drying, about, you know, all these things that that you wouldn't really have thought about otherwise. So now I'm on the mouth and the chin. These are my most difficult areas for me. I find they often turn into a bit of a sort of fudge. So I'm trying to keep the lips and the chin sort of, you know, with some kind of shape, but I do find those areas very hard. And also, I want to retain this element of earthiness. I didn't realise that it wasn't actually proper sort of earthenware terracotta, but actually painted plaster. So when I was painting it, I thought, oh, it's that lovely sort of sheen of burnt, you know, brick type colour, which it is, but actually it's just painted on, which is quite nice, because I always like this idea of, you know, the authentic. You know, we're trying to paint things authentically, and yeah, it's a bit of a lost cause. You can see I'm using different brushes. Generally, if you use a wider brush and that holds more water, like a mop or a wide brush like that, the effect is that all there's less. The wash is more even. If you're using a smaller brush, then you're putting on different quantities of paint with different amounts of water, and so you get more kind of visual texture, if you like. I'm using a flat brush at the moment because it just stops me fiddling about too much. If I had a very fine brush, I may be trying to paint in nostrils, or, you know, lips or wrinkles or whatever, and that doesn't help me at all when I'm trying to construct the shape of a face in sort of 3D effect, as it were. But sometimes, yeah, I want a small brush because otherwise I can't really control where the paint goes at all. So that's why you see me swapping brushes. It also stops the painting just having one singular effect. There I go with the chin again, help. But again, you know, I think I like this kind of exercise because it is a, for me anyway, it's a generic portrait. It's, you know, my aim is to talk about watercolour and create this kind of effect. And that's why I find portraiture per se quite a hard effect if you're trying to paint someone, particularly if you know them very well. Because you end up concentrating on the very tiny differences between what makes one person different than another, and a problem that I don't have at the moment. So here I go again, darkening my background, which is a process I do quite a lot. I mean, I tend to work my figure and my background, sort of building up the value relationships little by little. I know some people dive straight in with the kind of relationships straight from the outset. So they'll put in a nice dark background, a nice dark figure, and they'll work then within those parameters. I find that quite hard because I never know how the painting is going to develop. So it's really up to you how you do that, but just always bear in mind that whatever colour you put down, it's always going to change according to the colour you surround it with. Now that goes as far as the colour itself is concerned, the hue, but also the value itself, how dark or light it is. So there you go, the final piece. I'm quite happy with it. Maybe I would have liked to have been a bit bolder with the way I would have put down the washes to build up the figure. Instead of doing it bit by bit, maybe I would have liked to have done it in a bolder way. It would have given a different effect. But I hope that can show you what kind of effects are possible with watercolour. Also, what I quite liked about it is the way I left the bottom left hand side kind of, whereas I built up the right hand side darker. I left that sort of quite light, because generally I have a tendency to create quite static compositions, and this is my attempt to kind of break away from this a bit. So as these videos are meant to help me progress in my painting as well as hopefully you, that for me was a bit of a result. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and have picked up some new tips or different ideas about painting in watercolour. The videos help me also to learn and to think about what I'm doing, and also at this time I feel I need to integrate myself to the online community, because it seems it's the way things are going. So forgive any amateur productions, they will get better. If you have any comments, positive comments, hopefully, please put them in the YouTube comments section. And if you subscribe, you will get notifications of any new videos I make. Don't be scared of commenting, because really I do need some feedback if I'm going to make these any better. Okay, so again, thanks for watching, and bye for now.